Monday, April 22nd. It's draft week here in Philadelphia. The Eagles have the 22nd pick, and John McMullen will tell us what they're going to do with that 22nd pick as we kick off draft week. Coming up today, 8:20, Jeff Kerr, and 9:20, Rick Saratella will begin our draft week coverage this week, and a couple of other updates on our draft stuff we'll have either later today or first thing tomorrow. You'll see some new activity here on the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. Johnny, good morning. Draft week, ready to go. How you doing?
Finally here. Gotta breathe out a sigh of relief. The paralysis by over-analysis. There's too much time, Krause.
Well, the mock draft, we're now, or many people are now on mock draft 10-0 or mock draft 15. A lot of chatter, a lot of conversation leading up to what will take place on Thursday. The first question, John, do the Eagles need to do anything other than sit at 22? And the reason I asked that question is looking at some of the quarterbacks that are going to be selected early, some of the offensive skill position talent that's going to be taken early. Will the Eagles find themselves in a position, if they do nothing, that they'll have their opportunity or their choice to get either an offensive lineman or a cornerback, if that's the way they're going?
Yes and no. From the perspective of most of the people who do mock drafts, remember they're talking in a more general sense about every team in the NFL. So you're talking about 32 teams who each have different boards and different wants and different systems and different coaches and different needs. So they're the mindset of one particular NFL team, and obviously we're talking about the Eagles here, is far more targeted than, the big board you're going to see, whatever your favorite draft site is going to be. So I'm talking to Mark Dominic last week, the former GM in Tampa Bay, and he had mentioned the number is 23 legitimate first round picks from his perspective. And, Mark had been in personnel department for 20 years, so he knows his stuff. But, and that's, and when I say legitimate first round grades, that's, maybe if you're at 25 and you don't like somebody, maybe that's time to think about trading down. And because you have that levels of the draft and there's a little bit of fall off, and then maybe you can add something to a similar player if you go down. So from just the math standpoint, the Eagles should be in good shape, especially because quarterbacks always get pushed up the board. There's 4 legitimate quarterbacks that should be in the top 22. They don't have any interest in a quarterback, obviously. There could be even more than that go in the top 22, and that would be a good thing for the Eagles because quarterback desperate teams push good football players down the board. But that's not how the Eagles are going to look at it. They're focused on 2 or 3 or 4 players that they feel is a fit for them. And, Howie's recent history, whether you go back 4 of the past 5 years, going back to Andre Dillard, they traded up to get a player. Jordan Davis, Devontae Smith, Jalen Carter, even last year, they had a small targeted trade up. And that's what I think the goal is going to be on Thursday night as well. I'm focused on 3 players, 2 of them from Alabama, Terrion Arnold, the cornerback, J.C. Latham, the offensive lineman. And the wild card is Laiatu Latu from UCLA. And he's a wild card because for those who don't know, he started his college career at Washington and had to medically retire for about 18 months because he had neck fusion surgery. So that's all about, I wish I could get apply on the office of uh, Dr. Arsh Denoda, who's the Eagles chief medical officer, because if I think if he's cleared and if they feel comfortable with him, I think he's in the mix as well. But that's a big if, and that's nobody can know. That's one of those things, and Howie talked about this as his pre-draft stuff. If the medical people flag somebody, that's it. You know, there's nothing you can do as a personnel guy, as a coach. You can't go in there and pound the table and say, I'm a medical expert. Take a shot. Um, and that happened with DK Metcalf. A lot of fans get upset and kind of talk about DK Metcalf to this day. A lot of teams red flag DK Metcalf. The Eagles were among them because he had a neck issue. And he's held up and he's worked out well, and it looks bad. But again, if the medical people flag a prospect, there's not much you can do about it. You got to trust them and you got to trust their expertise. So Latu is the wild card, but I would say, as always with the Eagles, they're going to focus on a couple players that they really want. And if one of them starts to slip, they're going to move to get them.
John, how do you think the Eagles are looking at themselves? And here's the reason why I asked that question. You go from within a half of winning the Super Bowl, you get out of the box in 2023 and win 10 games, 10 of your first 11 games, are dominating or are finding ways to come back and win that game, and then fall off the table, completely fall off. And the fall off leads to chaos, conversation, the A.J. Brown scenario, and then you come full circle, and now you find yourself on the doorstep of the draft, obviously. And I wonder how the Eagles are, or Howie Roseman is self-evaluating his pick or his priority for this pick. Is he, well, let me get you to answer that first. Where are they from a self-evaluation standpoint? Where are the Eagles right now in their mind, based on your opinion?
As far as being a contender, not a contender, as far as going after a particular player, well,
forget the player for a moment. Hey, this is where we are. We decided to keep Nick Sirianni. We talked to Bill Belichick. Any and all of that. They are who they are right now. They kept Nick Sirianni. They got new coordinators. Where do they feel they are when they assess going into the draft?
They clearly believe they are still a contender. I don't agree with what they did with the coaching staff, and I don't agree entering a season as sort of a lame duck coach. And by lame duck coach, I mean, if Nick Sirianni doesn't reach expectations this year, it's more than likely he's not going to be back next year. That seems to be obvious, or it seems to be the thought process around the league. And if it's obvious to people around the league, that means it's obvious to people in the locker room. And if things go poorly, then you have the human nature aspect of, well, this guy's not going to be around next year anyway. And that can head in a negative direction. That's why I never like sort of lame duck coaches or lame duck quarterbacks, for that matter, either. Never works for that reason. And he's not a literal lame duck, so people can argue in the other direction. But again, if you're being realistic, and Nakobe Dean, when he talked last week, he talked about being an optimistic, realistic person or something of that nature. And that's fine to be optimistic, but you got to be a realist as well. And look, everybody sees it. And so you're trying to sell something in an opposite direction that everybody sees. So I don't agree what they did with the coaching staff. Hopefully, from the prospect of getting Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, they will have better coordinators. But again, it's talent first. It's personnel first. It's always good times or bad times. Um, and having a better coach than Sean Desai is not going to win you 3 more games if you have the same level of talent and the same level of play that you had last season from some of the guys you were counting on. So, um, that part of it, I think, fans too often they want to protect their favorite players, so they don't want to blame the players. And usually, when things are going well, it's all the players. So they're great, everybody's great. And when things are going poorly, it's blamed on the coaches. And it's usually players. It's fair to give the players credit when things are going well. It's not fair to make excuses for them when things are going poorly. Um, and that's, you know, and Big Fangio is a great coach. He's not a miracle worker. So, they have to play better. The players have to take responsibility. They have to take ownership of it. And hopefully they will. Hopefully, I've already predicted, I think they'll have a huge increase in defensive productivity just because Big's around. I think he'll teach it better. I think they'll be better prepared. But at the end of the day, they have big holes at alt ball linebacker. We have to see how the cornerback situation develops. We have to see how the safety situation develops. I mean, CJ Gardner-Johnson, everybody remembers him here. He barely played last season in Detroit because of a torn pec. When he was out there, he didn't play well and he lost his job. So assumption he's going to be the same guy. Is he going to be better than what the Eagles had? Sure. But there's what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of questions on the defensive side of the football. And we'll see how that shakes out. Offensively, it's a little bit different because Krause, Kellen Moore is just under extreme pressure, and the fact that everybody thinks this is the best offense in football before they take one snap in OTAs. And that's the standard, and that's the expectation. So if you're eighth again, number 8 in the NFL, that's where the Eagles were last season. They were number 3 in third down offense, number 1 in fourth down offense, number 9 in red zone offense. All that is really good. It's not good enough. It wasn't good enough last year. It's certainly not going to be good enough this year because people think they're better because of the addition of Saquon Barkley. And again, the focus is on skill position players. You also lost Jason Kelce. Probably more important of the two, but offensive line isn't as sexy as getting another skill position player. So Kellen Moore comes in with these enormous expectations. He might be a great coach. He might have the 6th ranked offense, which would be phenomenal.
Is that enough, John?
Not
Is
good. Hell
good
no.
enough?
Hell no. So that's what he's dealing with. A little bit different. And that, to be honest, that falls on the shoulders of Jalen Hurts. And, it's up to Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier to get him back on track. And they're a big part of it from the teaching and preparation standpoint. Hopefully they do a better job. But, Jalen Hurts has got to look like Jalen Hurts of 2022 rather than Jalen Hurts of 2023. So, and again, people want to blame that on Brian Johnson. He's the scapegoat. Some people blame it on Nick Sirianni. Whomever. Blame whoever you want. Bottom line is, guy's got to get back to where he was before.
Well, where was Jalen in the first 10 or 11 games last year compared to where he was finishing up when they fell off the table? Was it Jalen Hurts?
I think he was still playing at a very high level. Remember, if you look at the betting odds when they were 10-1, he was the leader for the MVP race. Now that has to do with winning football games. Let's be honest. But was he playing as well as he was? No. But the difference, and I talked about it on the show at that time, the difference was the turnovers. That was the only real difference. There's a little bit lack of explosion from in the running game, whether it was the knee injury. I do think he fell in love with the big play a little bit too much and was trying to push the football when defenses made an adjustment. We're trying to take that away. I think he fell in love with that. But the big difference between 2022 and 2023 was the turnovers. And some of that is just random. Coaches hate that. And I don't, if you use the term luck, but it is. Sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way. There's different. You have to look at every single turnover. The interception against the Jets, their lone loss in that 10-1 start. That's all Jalen Hurts. That's just a blatant mistake. The interception in Seattle, that's all Jalen Hurts. That's just a blatant mistake. On the other hand, if you have a jumbled snap at the mesh point, and that gets put on the quarterback's record, sometimes it's the running back's fault. So you have to look at each one individually. But first things first, take care of the football. And in his entire career, he's been tremendous with ball security. So similar to a couple years ago, Dak Prescott had a bad season when it came to turnovers. And I told everybody, don't get excited. It's probably going to go back to normal because that guy takes care of the football. And it went back to normal. I expect the same thing with Jalen Hurts, and that'll help immensely, by the way.
So based on that, John, if the Eagles do nothing and stay at 22, perhaps that's the answer. Maybe the Eagles don't need to do anything. But let's just assume for a moment they do nothing and they stay at 22, and there's an offensive lineman there that they like, one of the 2 or 3 offensive linemen that they've identified. There's a couple of the cornerbacks that are there, 2 or 3, 1 or 2 of them that they've identified as players that they like. Which way will they go if they stay put at 22?
Well, if any of those 3 names drop, and again, I put the asterisk on in the fact of that's all medical. He's involved if he's cleared, and they'll take him in a second, I would think, at 22 if he falls that far. But you have to realize if the Eagles clear him medically, others are probably going to clear him medically. So I think it's going to be very difficult in that type of instance because it's a poor defensive draft. Very offensive heavy draft at the top. The first defender is probably going to be Dallas Turner to go. Maybe 9, 10, 11, somewhere in that range. That's how long it's going to take a defensive player to go. And it might be one of the corners. It might be Terrion Arnold. The corners are sort of like, what flavor do you like? And I think the Eagles like Terrion Arnold best. Cooper DeJean a little bit. Would I take him at 22? Maybe, but I wouldn't go up to get him. I just don't think they're staying at 22. It's just not Howie's way. He's going to identify 3, 4 players. And if one of them starts to fall a little bit farther than the Eagles expected, I think he's going to go up and get him. He doesn't, remember, as a contender, he doesn't need volume. So I think a lot of people get caught up in volume. Oh, you need this pick, you need this pick. No, you don't. You need to get difference-making players who can maybe put you over the hump when you're trying to shoot for a Super Bowl. If you're a rebuilding team, yeah, you want bodies. You want players. You want to trade down, add picks. The Eagles aren't in that point. If you look at their roster, yeah, they need a running back. They'll take a running back on day 3. They would like to get a third wide receiver that's an upgrade over Paris Campbell. They might even want a backup tight end for Dallas Goedert. You could use some depth on the offensive line. Certainly right guard is where we're focused on in the first round. And then kicking out to right tackle, and that's where I think Latham is the fit. They could use another edge rusher. You can always use another edge rusher. Deep at defensive tackle. They need an off-ball linebacker, but that conversation doesn't start until day 2 or day 3, to be honest. Maybe day 2. And then secondary, obviously they need some talent there as well. But if you compare that against most teams, they need a hell of a lot more. So the Eagles don't need volume, they need difference makers. And they're going to identify, again, 3 or 4 players they think can be difference makers. And I think that's just Howie's way. He likes the trades. That's Howie. That's what he said.
Well, I think they need a difference maker at wide receiver number 3. And I know that that's a, unusual statement given the fact that they have so much money dumped in AJ Brown and now the re-up of Devontae Smith.
Only one football, Krause.
What's that?
Only one football.
Only one football, but you still need in the modern NFL, John, you need those assets and those weapons because they need to outscore everybody. They need
I think they
need to score a lot of points to win games.
I don't think that's going to be the case. Yeah, they're going to score a lot of points, number one. I don't think it's this, even if you go back last year, and we got to get to the break in Jeff Kerr, but even if you go back last year, they won in Tampa 25-11. They beat the Rams 23-14. The Dolphins was their most impressive game, 31-17. Remember, Miami had been coming off that 70-point game. They were the best offense in the NFL at that point. I think after things went off the wheels and they made the dumb switch to Matt Patricia, people have sort of conflated that into consistently bad all the time. They were terrible against San Francisco, who's the best offense in the NFL. They were terrible against Dallas, who's the best, top 5 offense. They only gave up 20 points to the Seahawks. Should have won that game. That was Jalen. And then down the stretch, they fell apart with the Giants and Cardinals. But I think there's this conflated notion that they were consistently bad. They had some high points, especially earlier in the season defensively.
We'll step aside and get to the break here on Birds 365 here on Draft Week. Turn it over to Jeff Kerr and John McMullen. Jeff Kerr doing a late night on CBS last night, another mock draft. I imagine Jeff has done 10 to 12 to 15 versions of the draft. So we'll get some of his thoughts here on Birds 365. Back in a moment.